we go. Yeah, so this is part 3 of our 3-part webinar series on work from home and the ergonomics of working from home. And like I said just a moment ago, we've been able to dive a little deeper on this topic, which has been really great to explore because it is a very important topic right now. It's something a lot of workplaces are struggling with and trying to navigate through. And so being able to dive in and really discuss some of these components in more detail has been great for us to sort of depart some of the thoughts that we're having, because we are talking about it and thinking about it often here too, even though we always work from home. We're talking about how we can support our clients and what sorts of services and things that you may need in order to be successful in the work from home situations that you're about to face, because we're there right now, but as we transition to that permanent element, things are going to change again, right? So today's component, the third piece of this webinar series, is about education. So we're talking about educating our staff and how we do that, because workplace or setup success doesn't come without education. And I can say that with 100% certainty, that without educating people on how to set up their workstation, the odds of them getting it right off the hop are unlikely. And so I think this is, well, if some of you know me and have worked with me for on and off for years, and if you do know me, you'll probably know or understand that training is my passion, right? I love the education part of my business. It's very exciting, and I find it very engaging and interesting, and I love bringing that ergonomic knowledge to people. It's really where my passion lies, and I love all of what I do, but I would say that training and education is my passion. And so this topic is sort of near and dear to my heart, because we have been doing training for a year, right? I can't believe I say that out loud, that it's been a year, but we've been doing training, right? Our at-home ergonomics session that we've been offering to workplaces, talking really about temporary setup, has been going on for more than a year at this point. And we've delivered it to literally more than 1,000 people. I don't think we've quite reached 2,000 yet, but we're getting close. That's crazy, right? And so it's wild to think about how much education we've been putting out there, but we've also been getting some good information back. And I'm going to impart some of the stats with you because it helps to sort of speak to why this education piece is so important. There. If I can get my slides to change, that's always a good start. There we go. And so what I want to just mention, if you are just joining us for this session, this is the third of a 3-part webinar series. I'm super happy to have you on board, even if this is your first one. But if you are interested in the other 2 sessions that go along with this to sort of create a more comprehensive package, they are always available on our YouTube, as will this one be available after the webinar is over today. So make sure that you hop on our YouTube channel. You can get there through our website. There'll be a link to YouTube right there. Just click on the button. It'll take you straight to our channel, and you can watch the other 2 webinars, one from February, one from March, and then now this one in April. So those are available to you if you did miss any of them, or if you want to review any of the content, because I know there's some good nuggets in there that you may want to go back and take another look at. All right, so why I say that education's a passion and why I think it's so important is there's a couple multifaceted things going on here, but it's a passion for me. But what I wanted to sort of highlight here is that after last month's webinar, we released a survey, right? A questionnaire. I had some questions for folks who had been attending to try and better understand where your needs are and what was happening at your workplace. And so one of my questions is, what was your main concern when facing the concept of work from home? And I let you check any boxes that applied here, but I thought it was really interesting that number one, the first thing that popped up as high priority for everybody that seems to be sort of thing we were struggling with or trying to figure out and navigate was the concept of self-assessment, right? Or assessing a workstation setup at home. How do we do that? So that was our primary one. Our secondary one was appropriate equipment. Interestingly enough, what webinar 2 was about. Webinar 1 was about self-assessment. Webinar 2 was about equipment. Those are high ticket items. Everybody's really curious about how we manage that process well, what kind of equipment we need, how do we assess the workstation setup. And then the third one is, how do we provide good ongoing training for staff? So it's sort of really interesting that those 3 pieces aligned with the webinar topics that we've been offering. They clearly are what's speaking to people in terms of your main concerns and how do you support your staff who are now in this work from home environment. So we appreciate the feedback for those of you who participated in the survey. And I just want to highlight that those three pieces really spoke to the three components that we've been talking about, right? We get it, we hear you, we've been trying to help address some of these issues. It doesn't mean that there's a magic bullet and they all get solved quickly and easily. There's still a lot of thought goes in, and every organization's going to handle it a little bit different, which we get, but we're trying to give you as much ammunition as possible so that you can make good, educated decisions about how you want to tackle this. So my plan for today is to talk very briefly, just reiterate the type of worker that we're talking about here. I want to talk about the training gap, because that's really, for me, that's my big why we want to do education and what that looks and feels like. Then we're going to talk about training strategies. What are different ways that we could train our staff? What's available to us right now? What is coming in the future? And what that might look or feel like for our organization. Pros, cons of sort of each method. I'm going to talk a little bit about recommended training content. Likely you can come up with some of this on your own if you obviously go back and review some of the CSA standard on office ergonomics. You could generate you could generate a fairly good list of training content. So I don't want to do that in too much depth, but I do want to highlight a few of the pieces there. And then I want to talk about how your training can do more, because I think a training at this point, right, a one-off training that is sort of not connected to any sort of system or systematic approach in your organization is probably not doing you the same service, that you are really doing you a disservice ultimately, right? Is that it's giving you the information you need, but it's not sustainable. It's difficult to repeat. It's not on a regular schedule. There's a lot of drawbacks to just sort of one-off trainings like that. And so we want to talk about how we can do more with our training. So hopefully it not only fulfills our training bucket, but also maybe hit some of those other components we're concerned about. The equipment component, potentially, the self-assessment piece or the assessment of a home office for sure, right? So how do we use our training to be effectively tackle this in a more systematic way? All right, so just a reminder, this slide has been on every one of our webinars so far. Just reiterating the fact that the three-part webinar series has really been focused on this permanent worker, right? We have been dealing with temporary workers, right? Every workplace in Ontario, some of you are not from Ontario, so your situation may be different, but in Ontario, we've been dealing with temporary workers on and off, temporary work from home, I should say, on and off since last March, right? It started almost immediately. All kinds of employees went home. And then we've gone through a couple additional lockdown, stay-at-home orders, whatever they've been called, where a significant chunk of workers have gone back home again, right? If they'd managed to come back to the workplace in between, or they went home last March and they haven't really come back yet, right? So that's our temporary work from home situation. If the intention is that that employee comes back full time, then they are really in a temporary holding pattern, right? We're less concerned. I'm not going to say we're not concerned about them, because we're still experiencing discomforts and injuries and issues with working from home with that group. But we are less concerned at this moment in this conversation with those workers, because they are going back to the office, right? And so we're able to sort of re-up the ergonomic game when they get back to the office, because we have fully adjustable equipment. We've got some training programs in place, maybe. We certainly have the tools, hopefully, the tools and things in place in the workplace in order to address those workers. When they go back, their ergonomic situation would likely change significantly for the better, right? Because we have the equipment there for them to use and properly set up. What we want to focus on, or what we've been talking about, is really this permanent work from home situation. And when I say that, if you recall from the previous webinars, I keep reminding you, it doesn't have to be permanent full-time. Just because a worker is working from home, part-time does not mean that they are not a permanent work from home employee, right? If they're home 2 days a week or 3 days a week and at the office 2 or 3 days a week, sort of as a hybrid approach, then chances are very good that then we need to be tackling ergonomics for their home offices as well as their obviously their office at work, right? And what that looks like and feels like is going to be different for every organization, but this is really that group we're focusing on. Folks are going to be at home full-time after the pandemic is over, right? And or folks that are going to be in a hybrid situation, consistently working from home multiple days a week, right? So they have a significant amount of time spent in the home office, whatever that may look like. So that's really the group we're most focused on at the moment, trying to figure out how we address ergonomic setup for those folks. So my why for today, right? I know this isn't a perfect comparison because I'm pulling some data from our at Home Ergonomics webinar, which is definitely designed for temporary work from home. Talks about all kinds of practical solutions, sitting on pillows, cushions, using blankets or small towels for lumbar support, for example, right? Definitely meant for a temporary, very practical way to tackle ergonomics in a home office. So I know it's not a perfect comparison, but I thought it really screamed some numbers at me that I wanted to share with you. So basically what we did is in the beginning of April, I guess, we went through and looked at all of our webinar data. So we pulled all of the numbers from every webinar that we had hosted up until that point. And we pulled out basically went through and looked at all the Q&A sections, right? All of the poll times when we asked a poll question and said, we have two key poll questions in our webinar. One is about, were you set up so your keyboard and mouse were at elbow height? Yes or no, right? No, my keyboard and mouse were above my elbow height or below, or yes, I was in line. And then we ask a question about monitor setup. So was your monitor set up at eye height? Yes, no, it's below my eye height. Yes, it's above my eye height. Right? Those are the two key poll questions we asked, right? So we've only sort of captured some very specific ergonomic setup elements, but we asked two key poll questions. And what I wanted to highlight here and why training I think is so important is that when we did those poll questions and ran those numbers, what we saw was this. Just over 35% of the people who responded to both questions had not achieved the ideal setup for monitor or working heights. They didn't have their monitor at the right height and they didn't have their keyboard and mouse at the right height. So both of them were an issue. 35%, more than a third of the people who answered both questions had both pieces set up incorrectly. Then we saw another almost 30% had their working height incorrect. So they were not able to type in mouse at elbow height. And then about 15% had their monitor height incorrect. So their monitor was too high or too low. And so if you add all those numbers up, what you end up with is that only 20% actually had both set up correctly. And that to me is a big number, right? 80% of the workforce that we interviewed or that we polled during our webinars had not achieved good ergonomic setup. Now I recognize, my recognition here or caveat is that I realize that this is a temporary situation. So we maybe haven't provided the same amount of equipment or things, tools and devices at home that we would potentially for a permanent work from home employee, right? As we transition to that environment, we may be making different choices, right? So they didn't go home with all the equipment and tools that perhaps we provide in the current situation as we discuss permanent, but I still thought that that number was sort of really spoke to me. More than 80% or almost 80% of these employees were set up poorly, which means without the education piece, without providing them with information about how to properly set up their workstation, they weren't successful, right? They didn't know how to set it up. There's various reasons why, right? They didn't have the right tools and equipment. They didn't know how to set it up. They didn't know what their goal or target was in terms of working height and reach distances and everything else, right? So there's various reasons why it may have happened, but I think education is a big piece, right? We had a lot of people say to us after the webinar, oh my gosh, I've made some adjustments and I'm feeling better already. I've managed to get myself to elbow height. I'm sitting on a pillow and I'm feeling better. Thank you so much. But those are the things that we're hearing as the webinar is wrapping up. And that's a direct connection to education, right? Providing them with the information about what is the ideal setup has allowed them to make adjustments to achieve that, right? And ultimately reduce the likelihood of injury and improve comfort, right? So without that education, staff are not being successful. And I'm giving you these numbers, and I'm going to also say that 20% that says they have both pieces correctly set up, we didn't poll a single question about a chair, right? Because temporary work from home, we made the assumption that most workers or most workplaces weren't providing people with a fully adjustable chair, nor were we expecting employees to have that at home, right? If you go back to our equipment talk from last month, we talked about various ways to do this. And so the ideal is that somebody has a fully adjustable chair, however that works for your organization. But in temporary situations, most of the people we are meeting with and talking with in those webinars are sitting on kitchen chairs. I've seen folding chairs. I've seen couches. I've seen all kinds of different things. Not a lot of fully adjustable true office chairs. Maybe on occasion an adjustable chair that goes up and down, but very few actual adjustment features. And so if we had started to add questions about a chair to this conversation, I think we would see that 20% who were correctly set up. I think that number would plummet, right? That's anecdotal. I don't know that for sure, but the arguably the chair is the most complicated part. And as soon as we would start introducing questions about the chair, I suspect that many of those individuals who had both of those pieces set up correctly would likely have had some issues with their chair setup. Right. And so I don't think this is a be all and end all, but I do think that's a really interesting number, right? Only 20% had even a shot at getting through good ergonomic setup of all the components of our workstation, right? So education, I think, is key. I think it's super important. It's why I love it. And I think this speaks to what we're going to talk about today. All right. So during the questionnaire that I released last month after the webinar for those that participated, one of the things we asked you is, what do you think is the best method for you to receive training at your organization, right? What works best for your group? And so I gave you 3 different options. I talked about live virtual sessions, right? Or a live session of some kind where the ergonomist is there online, like I am this morning, giving you some sort of education session. And we've done that. We can continue to do that with that at-home ergonomics session. I'm delivering several sessions next week for NIOSH week on all varying topics, right? And I'm going to be live for all of those. So we can always have a live ergonomics session, right? That's always an option, whether it's in person or virtual in this case, because all your employees will be working from home. That's always available, right? Always an option. And so there's, in my opinion, there are 2 additional options. There may be more than this, but they sort of came to light, and what I asked about were 2 additional options. One was using your existing learning management system. So if you already have one, right? Not all organizations have them. It depends on the size of the organization, the type of work you do, et cetera. But if you already have an existing learning management system, would you be most benefited by some sort of module that you upload to that learning management system, right? So that you or your staff are already familiar with the system. You've got several other training modules built into that already. And so now you've uploaded it to the learning management system and released it sort of as a requirement for people to complete if they work in an office. Okay, so that would be certainly another way to go, right? Purchasing some sort of module that you can upload. And then the third option is the one that we're going to talk about in varying ways today is something that we're actually really excited about. We've been developing this. This is the big change here happening at Pro Ergonomics is we have seen a huge need and ask for online training. Right? That's been by far the biggest component of my personal job. I think Alex and Sarah have been doing a bit more on-site work, but I've been delivering a lot of virtual training, from half-day sessions split up into a couple sections to recorded things that I'm sending off to live trainings like what we're doing today in our at-home ergonomics session. So we've seen a huge upswing in requests for online training. And so the most cost-effective and best ways to do that in some cases might be some sort of online training module that you access. And that's really where Pro Ergonomics is going with some of our training right now, trying to give you better access to online modules for ergonomics that are more flexible and have some different options. But I do think there are pros and cons to each one of these types of trainings, right? So I just want to highlight a couple of those. So live virtual sessions, I think the big plus here is that it's live, right? Is that you get someone like myself sitting here, you have questions that, staff have questions in the moment, they're asking them during the webinar, they're getting direct feedback immediately. Right? So you're getting some great information in that instant. And depending on how that's done, you can still build in maybe some self-assessment or some checks through polling and other data that you may be able to, depending on what platform you use and what that looks like, you may be able to get some good information that way. Okay. The big drawbacks for me on this one, and definitely what we have seen over the last year, is that one of the biggest challenges is getting people to attend, right? Is getting people to attend, finding a time that works for everyone, making sure that the people who registered show up. You obviously have to track that. What happens if somebody doesn't show, right? Maybe it's a mandatory training. Your expectation is that they're there and they're sick that day. Well, what happens now, right? I have one person who did not receive the training that is mandatory for them. How do I get them that training? Because it was a live session, right? There is no recording to review later. There's no way to get them to log on their own time to complete the training, right? So that seems to be the biggest drawback. Fabulous to have someone online, and I love being online with people. I love that interaction, right? The passiveness of being behind a computer with nobody here is not as nearly as much fun, but it is not always easy to coordinate, get everybody on there, make sure that you're getting obviously everybody trained up. right? And then you have to deliver that live session with whatever frequency you've decided is appropriate, right? To ensure that you have that ongoing, sustainable training happening for your work from home employees. In addition, you hire somebody new, and we're going to be going through phases of that, right? Where you hire someone new and you don't have, they weren't able to attend the training because they weren't literally on your staff at the time. Well, now it might be another 6 months or 8 months before the training is going to happen again. And that's a big lag time for someone to be working at home without access to that training, right? So we don't necessarily want to wait the 6 or 8 months before we launch it again. So it works really well, depending on the type of environment you have, the amount of turnover, etc. But there can be some drawbacks to that as well. I think the other two options, sort of the idea of an online module or a module uploaded to an existing learning management system, address many of those concerns, with the obvious drawback here of that it's not live, right? Is that you're not getting that live interaction with an ergonomist, right? Delivering content about ergonomics and ergonomic setup, but you do get, eliminates all the other pieces, right? No worry about a new hire, right? A new hire comes on tomorrow, no problem. It's already in our existing learning management system. No problem. We've already got access to this learning module as part of your onboarding. You need to complete the office ergonomics work from home training, right? That can happen at any point, and they can do it at whatever time is convenient for them. So if you're like me and you've got a little person at home doing school, and sometimes you're off the computer in the middle of the afternoon because they need help, you could do your online module at 10 o'clock at night, if that's when you are available, right? So it frees up and creates a lot of flexibility in these types of modules, right? So there's a lot of benefit there, but it's not palatable for everyone, right? Not everybody, you know your staff the best, and you know what they're going to receive the best, and it's not always something that they're excited about, right? We've been online learning out maybe in some cases, and so when that's the case, you may find that they really do prefer the live, and you want to figure out how you maybe build in both, or perhaps, focus on the live options at the moment. But like I said, we are very excited because we are very close. Actually, while I'm delivering this webinar today, Alex and Sarah are in a meeting on my behalf with our developer, and they are putting some of the final touches on our online learning system. So we are super excited about this module that's coming, and I've got some sneak peeks to share with you at the end. So stay with me till the end to get a little peek at what some of the slides and content is going to look like, because we wanted to tick all those boxes. We wanted to be convenient. We want you to be speaking with a certified ergonomist, and we wanted to also do more than just training. We'll talk about how all those pieces come together. So any questions about the different types of modules, or something else that you've tried that you found you wanted to sort of introduce as another strategy? I'm open to having a conversation about anything else that might be out there as well. All right. I'm not seeing anything new pop up. So let's talk about training content. So what do you want to cover off in a training session? And I think you could think about this in lots of different ways, but if it was me and I was trying to develop something in-house or look at different modules that are out there and available to me, I would probably focus, again, I am based here in Canada, and so I would focus on the CSA standard, right? There is a CSA standard for office ergonomics. I think I've mentioned this in one of the previous webinars. It's Z412-17. That's the office ergonomics standard. And when it became a standard, right? So it's not that long ago that it became a standard, transitioned from a guideline to a standard. And one of the pieces that showed up when it became a standard is this component here, the education and training piece. So the CSA standard now specifies that an organization shall provide education about the important role workstation selection and layout play in health, well-being, and productivity, right, in office ergonomics. And users should be trained on how to adjust furniture and arrange their workstation. And they give some very specific elements about, proper working height and reach zone, right, how to organize your desk so that you minimize your risk of injury from reaching and you've got working at the right height. The importance of movement, which is also going to be key here, I think, especially for your work from home employees who tend to get chained to their desk. That's what we've seen more frequently over the last several months, is that people are spending more time at their computer when they're working from home, not less. And there's lots of reasons why that happens. Awareness of all the adjustments and controls that are available to them. So if you give them a chair and it's got 15 different levers to pull, they need to know what they are, been educated about what those different adjustments do and how to use them properly so that they can fit the workstation or the chair to their body, right? Their body stature. And then I think sort of more general things like the health risks associated with technology use and the importance of proper adjustment, or what happens if we don't adjust it properly, right? What our risk of injury is going to be like, right? Following very much like the Occupational Health and Safety Act, right? We need to identify the hazards that are present, which in an office are awkward postures we hold for prolonged periods of time primarily, and then talk about how we mitigate those, right? So proper ergonomic setup, people need to understand their tools and equipment, have received training on them, and then understand some of the work method choices like work organization and movement, right? And how that's going to benefit them. And so I would sort of think about those two things as interlinked, right? If we're using the CSA standard as a jumping off point to build that training, I think that's great. You're going to cover off a lot of the key topics that you're looking for. And then obviously aligning that with the Occupational Health and Safety Act, because ergonomics is health and safety, right? So we want to make sure that we're addressing all of our key roles and responsibilities in identifying and educating staff and protecting them from the risks that are present. Okay, so that's a sort of a general overview, sort of high level as to what that training should look like. I think when we dive down into that a little bit more, I think you're going to start by talking about things like office ergonomic hazards, right? What are the hazards in an office environment? Well, we're trying to prevent musculoskeletal disorders. These are injuries of yada, yada, and they're typically caused in an office by X, Y, and Z, right? Awkward postures that we hold for a prolonged period of time. How we prevent them or avoid them is by making sure that our workstation is properly set up. We've just, in those few statements I've just made, obviously I might expand a little more, but I've checked a lot of the CSA standard boxes, right? Talked about what are the hazards, how they occur, and what are the steps in order to address those or reduce our risk. Right, and then we would dive into that equipment setup component, talk about working height, talking about chair, talking about keyboard, mouse, monitor, and any other accessories that you might require or provide at your workplace, right? So sometimes, everybody has gone home with a headset, for example. You definitely want to sort of talk about the headset, right? And the importance of using the headset, because that's a tool you've provided. We want to make sure we're educating on the use of that. Right, so you go through and you cover off all the different equipment setup components present at your workstation. And I think you wrap up by talking about the importance of movement. I think that can't be understated. Like I said, what I would say anecdotally is that people working from home spend a lot more time in their chair than somebody in the office. And this probably depends a little bit on the type of worker they are, but yourselves are probably a great example. If you've been working from home exclusively or very nearly exclusively, you'll probably notice that you sit way more on the days that you're at home, which sounds, sometimes at first I would have said sounds counterintuitive, but when you dive into it, it actually makes a lot of sense, because now all of your meetings are on the computer, right? They used to occur, or on the phone, right? They used to occur in person. People used to come to your office. You used to walk down the hall to a boardroom to participate in a meeting. All of those pieces have been eliminated. So we hop from thing to thing to thing, all of which happens right here in front of this webcam. And so, or on my computer screen. And so we spend actually quite a bit more time, I think, while we are at home sitting at our computer workstation. So the importance of movement is almost amplified in our work from home situations. So we definitely want to talk about the importance of movement, and then work to foster that as part of our expectations at work, that we are creating more movement opportunities in the work that we do. Right. And there are lots of ways that can happen. And we would be talking about all that as part of our training components. I didn't want to go through all of these pieces because I don't think I need to tell you about how, to select the right working height and how to, the keyboard mouse height. Yeah, like there's a lot of pieces here, and I could spend the whole session just sort of going through a proper workstation setup. And that's not really what I intended to do today. I wanted to give you sort of a framework or an outline for that training. But I did want to dive into just a couple pieces to give you a sense as to what that training could look or feel like. And so specifically, I wanted to share, talking a little bit about that sort of introductory piece, the idea of good posture and how it creates comfort. And we're looking to achieve sort of this neutral setup. Here's what it looks like, straight from the CSA standard. This is your reference posture. This is your goal, or your goal posture for working at home or in the office, right? So you start with a bit of a lead in. And then I wanted to highlight just specifically the chair, because I think this is the most complicated piece of workstation equipment that we see in a home office or really any office, right, that the chair does more than pretty much everything else. So because it's the most complicated piece, I think it's important that we really do it justice, right? That we make sure we go through all the different adjustment features that are out there, that are available, and then talk about how to properly set up each one. Now, I also want to pick the chair because it is one of the most variable pieces as well, right? If I get a monitor, it varies in size and maybe in clarity, but ultimately a monitor is a monitor, right? It doesn't have, it may work a little differently and may even go up or down or be stationary. But at the end of the day, I really just need to make sure that my top of my screen is even with my eye height, right? And that it's a 1 arm's length away, regardless of the size and whether the pedestal raises and lowers. I either stick a book underneath or I use the pedestal to do that, right? And so it's a little bit simpler to tackle. Whereas a chair, especially, and again, this depends a little bit on how you tackle the chair as part of your equipment for work from home situation. Again, thinking about last month's webinar. If you are going to provide chairs to everyone, then this process and this education piece maybe becomes a little easier because everybody will have the same chair. That's true in an office environment as well. If everybody in the office has the exact same chair because you've got a chair standard and you use the same vendor for years, for example, then chances are very good everybody's chair adjusts in the same way, and sort of a one size fits all education, it works, right? Works really well. And because everybody's adjustments are exactly the same and we just teach them how to use the chair that they have. In a home office environment, I think this is one that is a bit trickier because chances are good, or there is potential there for the employee to be responsible for their chair, right? So as an employer, I have not provided the chair. That's one of the requirements of them to be able to work from home, is that they have a fully adjustable chair, right? That's one of the requirements before I allow them to work from home. And so they now have to purchase that chair. And then what that means is that every one of those chairs in every home office likely adjusts a little bit different. And so in that case, we need to be sure that we are being very global in the way that we're describing this, right? And I don't mean global like global furniture. I mean, like, we need to be broad in the way that we're describing this, right? Because we need to make sure that the way we're teaching people to adjust a chair is in line with the chair that they actually have. So they're not sitting there looking at paddles on the video that do not exist on their chair. It's not possible for them to possibly make that connection or draw the same conclusion from that education piece, right? Because they literally can't find any of those features on their chair. And so this becomes a little bit more challenging, and I think it's possible to do. I would argue it is, because we've done it in our online module. We've taken some of the most common ways that chairs adjust, right, from literally hundreds of office assessments. Typically, the most common ways are to have like a 2 or a 3 paddle system on the right-hand side, sometimes to have a paddle on the left-hand side, and then armrests typically adjust in very similar ways, right? The armrests don't vary nearly as much as other components, but your backrest adjusts differently. Some people's backrest is a ratchet back. Some people have a knob at the bottom. Some people's lumbar support adjusts independently of the backrest altogether. The backrest doesn't actually go up and down, right? These are the kinds of variety you see in chairs. And so if you aren't going to create a standard for a chair and give them a chair, or, create an expectation that they have a chair from this company, here's our vendor, we'll get you some preferred pricing, but this is the one we expect you to have. These are the things that we need to be really good at in our education piece, is being broad enough that we educate in a way that people can understand how to adjust their chair, even if it looks slightly different than the one on the screen or slightly different than the one for the person in the next office down the road, right? Or the next house down the road. Okay, so this is a bit more of a complex section that requires a bit more thought to try and be broad enough to capture all of the different situations they might be in. I also want to highlight sit stand, because this is something, again, that probably at home has the opportunity to look a little bit different, right? So in an office, this is not what you would look like, right? We would not approve someone to work on a standing workstation with some totes stacked up and a table leaf acting as our keyboard tray. But in a home office, I think there's a little bit more flexibility in how we do this, and it can be a really good strategy for people to work from home with a standing option, right? To create more variety, especially because they're likely to spend more time at their computer at home, seated in their chair, than they do in the office. And so if that's the case, getting and creating movement through our day through sit stand options can be great. And so we want to be thoughtful about sort of how we tackle this component as well, because it's important that we sort of encourage and create that movement as a mitigation strategy, right, for preventing things like low back pain, right, because we're getting people out of their chair and encouraging movement throughout the day and varying postures. Right. So we want to talk about what that looks like at home. We want to be sort of more broad and more understanding and encouraging of a variety of sit stand solutions. It does not have to be a fully height adjustable desk. It doesn't even have to be a desk add-on. This set up beside my seated workstation, where I just drop my laptop on top, in almost all cases is ergonomic, as long as I get the settings all set up right. And there's really nothing unsafe about it, provided everything is sturdy. So these are the kinds of things that you might want to consider sort of being a little bit more broad on. Again, when you start to talk about working at home ergonomics, it can look a little different than the office. And so we need to be open to that as well, I think, in order to encourage some more creative solutions like what you see on the slide there for a sit stand, right? We don't need to invest in a $600 or $1,000 height adjustable desk, right? We can make that happen at home as long as it is properly achieving ergonomic setup. Right, so those are some examples of the content and just things to think about again as we start to navigate through how do we tackle this? What is this going to look like? How do we train? There are some areas that I think you can be more flexible on, like your sit stand. And then there's some areas that are pretty straightforward, like your monitor and your keyboard and mouse. But then there's that chair area, which I think is more complicated and probably requires a little bit deeper level of thought. And it maybe depends on how you decide to tackle chairs from an ergonomic equipment perspective, right? That might influence or color your decision on how you educate on chairs. All right, so let's wrap up today talking about doing more with your training, right? So I don't think training should be a standalone piece here. I think especially when we transition to online learning platforms, talking about embedding a module into your online learning system or participating in an online learning system, like an online module of some kind, like we're getting ready to launch here shortly. There could be a lot more going on than just training, right? It can check more boxes for you, which I think is very cool. And so we want to talk about what those things could be and how we can use this to create a more systematic and comprehensive approach, and basically cover off some pieces, right? Make your jobs easier. Should be the goal of this next section. Do more with your training to make your job easier. That's the message. So I think your training can also be a self-assessment, right? And I brought this slide back, this diagram or graph from one of my first slides today, because this was one of your number one concerns, right? Self-assessment. And I asked also in that questionnaire, I provided a spot to say, what are some of the things you want us to answer, questions you want to answer? And we had some really good ones. And a lot of them, I would say probably about half of the questions were about self-assessment, how to do that. What about invasion of privacy? How do you do an office assessment or a self-assessment if the employee refuses to turn on a video camera at home, right? Because they feel like it's an invasion of their privacy or their personal space. How do you possibly evaluate work from home setup? And I think the answer to those questions is maybe not simple, right? An employee who won't turn their screen on so that you can see their work from home setup is going to be challenging, right? In order to properly and objectively evaluate that. But I do think probably the short answer is that it needs to start with self-assessment, right? We need to evaluate, they need to evaluate their at-home setup through a variety of self-assessment checklists and tools, right? So that you get that feedback. And if the employee has reported that all things are good, right, they answered all the self-assessment questions right, then maybe there's no need to progress or push any kind of online in-person self-assessment, right? So I thought that was just an interesting sort of connection to this, is that the self-assessment piece built into your training might address some of those issues and eliminate some of the management of trying to release self-assessments and wade through all the paperwork and gather the data and who's going to follow up. Maybe your self-assessment built into your training does some of that for you, right? Simplifies your life. So an example of what this might look like in an LMS type program is sort of self-assessment check questions at each of the different sort of as you cover off each of a different section, right? This is how we are building our module, or how our module has been built at the moment, is that somebody will go through the working height section, talking about how you adjust your workstation to set yourself up at elbow height. And at the end of the section, we're going to ask you a question or multiple questions, depending on the section, about your setup. So now that you've gone through this section, where, the example here is my work surface is at elbow height when I am seated. Yes, it is. No, it's too high. No, it's too low, right? And we've just gone through the education piece. I wanted you to make the adjustments during the module, and now you've made your adjustments. Are you at elbow height? And if the answer here is yes, then self-assessment complete, moving on to section number 2. And as a health and safety person, we don't have to worry about following up or checking in, right? We might still have another sort of follow up with a manager or something, but you don't necessarily have to, right? Because your self-assessment has indicated that you are properly set up and there's no additional action required, nothing flagged for follow-up, right? And so I would set that up or have questions sort of connected to each component of your online learning system. This is a little harder with a live session, right? It could be completed as a questionnaire after the session potentially, right? Like a form released to staff with a questionnaire in it so that they can go through and check the boxes. Again, doing a bit of a self-assessment after they provided with the education and made some adjustments. Because that's what we really want to know, right? We want to educate, give them an opportunity to change it and fix it so that it's addressed. And then we want to self-assess so that we determine if it's correctly set up. And then if it's still not correctly set up, then that indicates that we need to take some type of action, right? We need to do some kind of follow-up on that. So I would say you ask some key questions after a section on working height. You have some key questions after a section on chair setup, probably multiple questions in the chair setup section. You're going to ask a question after monitor section, right? Monitor height, monitor distance, probably a question after your keyboard and mouse section, maybe even a question or two after your accessory pieces, again, depending perhaps on what you have present at your workplace, right? What you've provided for folks to go home. You may change up some questions there. Right, but ultimately, your training, if it's paired with that self-assessment and learning management model, like an online learning management, or my language is gone, and your learning management system or an online system that's tracking that, you would get all of these. They're not graded. They're not, it's not a yes, no answer, correct or incorrect. We're trying to provide or gather information about whether further action is required for this employee or not. And if they're set up correctly, no action's required. But if they're not set up correctly, then the next step is that it triggers some sort of follow-up, right? Or check in with that employee, right? So if there's ever a gap, so if they weren't able to work at elbow height, we need to know why. And then we need to figure out how we're going to address that, because we know that that's an ergonomic issue. Right now, the risk or the hazard that's still there is posture associated with poor working height. And so next steps as an employer is to figure out how we're going to bridge that gap. Right? What is going to that follow-up or follow-up or check-in going to look like? And what are we prepared to do to take action to prevent an injury, right? Is it about providing them with information about maybe additional adjustments that they need to make? Is it potentially providing an additional piece of equipment, right, that they don't have currently? Maybe it's just recommending a piece of equipment. Maybe they're responsible for their home office setup. We've identified that there's a gap, and so we know that they need this piece of equipment in order to address that. We provide them with that recommendation and the link to our vendor supplier to help them get it at a good price, right? Whatever steps are part of your process in terms of equipment acquisition is ideal here, right? So just little things to think about, right? We identify a gap. We need to bridge that gap in order to prevent those injuries, and so we need to figure out how we do that. I think this is really how we prevent injuries, right? We sort of head off potential injuries, right? They refer ultimately a self-assessment checklist that has a gap sort of determines or triggers the next action step. And I'm trying to give you some examples because there isn't, again, a one single path on how we do this. It might be it triggers, immediately triggers equipment. Right? You identify that you could not set your keyboard or mouse up correctly, or maybe you identify that you couldn't set your monitor up correctly because you have a laptop and you don't have a separate keyboard or mouse or monitor. Maybe that immediately triggers an equipment order, right? So we send them a keyboard and mouse to make sure that they're set up correctly if they don't have that already. Maybe it triggers a follow-up or a check-in from a manager. Maybe it follows a follow-up or a check-in from a health and safety professional or an HR professional, depending on who's managing that program. Maybe it's going the next step, right? Again, this might be an advanced step, but maybe it triggers a more in-depth online assessment from someone like myself, right? Maybe you partner with an organization like us, something goes a little awry with one of your workstation setups at home, you're having trouble figuring out how to fix it. And if you can't sort of tackle it in that follow-up or any sort of quick equipment changes, maybe it triggers that more in-depth assessment to, again, head off those injuries of the past, dealing with them before they become lost time and expensive things that we're trying to manage. Right? So that reporting feature that's built into a learning management system in whatever form you're using it can give you a lot of good tools to sort of tackle the self-assessment, maybe tackle some action items, maybe even address some of the equipment questions that we've been talking about over the last several months, right? So again, your training can do more, right? It doesn't have to just be straight up education. You can build in all kinds of layers to this so that you get the information you need to have a really well managed, consistent program that ultimately does prevent injuries, because it's flagging the issues and it's, clear steps or action items that need to be taken when those issues are identified, right? And that's how we prevent those injuries from becoming, discomforts from becoming actual reportable injuries. One of the other questions that I wanted to sort of touch on today before I give you a quick sneak peek of the new program here is that frequency. How often do we need to deliver this training to our staff? And I wanted to first highlight that the CSA standard doesn't specify an exact timeline for this, so it's not a hard and fast answer. But I think common practice is to align it with other refresher training requirements you have at your organization. A lot of refresher training occurs annually, for example. And so I think ergonomic training, like an office ergonomics program, annually makes sense, right? So that would be a sort of a good reference point in order to start from, I think, annually. And the good news is that I think more and more workers expect this kind of training, right? They expect it to do online trainings. They expect there to be refreshers for all of that content. And one of the questions is like, how often do I make sure that somebody's still set up correctly at their home office? They could still complete the self-assessment as part of every refresher, right? Every time they go in, they complete the module and they do the self-assessment as your ongoing annual check to make sure that they are still set up correctly in their home office, right? So if you're building that into your training program and your training plan, the self-assessment, I still think, is a key role here for that due diligence check. Are you still set up correctly 1 year later? Yes, no. Are you having any more discomforts that we need to, or gaps or issues that we need to identify? Yes, no, right? And it gives you, again, we have clear direction after that on what action steps we take, whether it's a follow-up or a more in-depth assessment or, right? There's lots of different options. So not a definitive answer on how often. I do think annually makes a lot of good sense for those reasons, right? That sort of once a year sign off that our workstation setup is still good as part of that self-assessment, and a reminder and a refresher as to how to set up our workstation, because things shift and change and we get a new piece of equipment and we maybe haven't thought to go back. And I guess that's the other piece about the online training modules that's also really nice, is that unlike a live session, an online module in my LMS or in an online program I have access to can be used at any point. So somebody gets a new chair, they're not sure how to set it up. Their manager should refer them to the online learning program, right? Go check out the chair section, revisit that, complete the self-assessment, and then we will obviously be able to sort of evaluate your setup, make sure you're set up correctly, and follow up if we need to. But you should refer them back to that learning management system again and again and again as they make changes to equipment, maybe as they report discomforts, right? We refer them back, see if they can address it themselves. And if not, then we progress through the next stages of ergonomic change, right? So we can refer them back to that program because it's always available and they can access it at any time, right? So that's a good tip and tool as well. All right. So I promised that I was going to share some snippets of the new online learning system that we've been developing, and I'm excited. This is the first time I've shared it really with anyone, and so like I said, we're putting final touches on it today. Alex and Sarah are working with our developer as we speak to do some updates to that. So that's super exciting, and we can't wait to share it with you. We are intending to share it with some demo days. So we'll be booking some, making available some demo sessions. So we'll host an event like this. You can come on, we'll demo or walk you through some of the components so you can understand the kind of training that's being delivered, what content you're going to expect to see with your staff if you're interested in that online module option. And then you can also see how the self-assessment tools will work, what the reporting looks like, and then what your access would be. Because as the manager, as administrators, we can see all the content that's being entered to make sure that we're helping you manage your program and following up if there are any things that we start to see as sort of trends or deficiencies. But the cool part of the program is that you'll also be able to see some of those. You want to run a report on those self-assessments and see if there's any gaps or things you need to address, you can hop in and do that. You want to check and see if all of the staff that needed to attend, that you assigned to attend or complete the session did it. You can hop on and take a quick look at that, right? So at any point, you also have access to some of that back-end information for your check-ins and follow-ups and regular, just regular sort of management of the program. And we'll help you through all of that as well, providing some more additional back-end support too. So we're super excited about it, and we can't wait to host some demo sessions. I'm kind of chomping at the bit to get started. And so keep an eye on our social media and our newsletters. We'll be posting when those are available, and we'd love for you, even if you're just curious, right? If you've been following with us or working with us for a long time and maybe this isn't the right fit for you right now, but you just want to see what we've been up to, please join us. We'd love to share it with you so that you can better understand what we're doing and then figure out if it will work for you in the future. And you can sort of keep it in your back pocket as something that might be a strategy for you as you move forward. All right. So without further ado, let's take a quick peek before we wrap up today. So the first module, first and foremost, our online learning system will be multiple modules, right? The intention is that we're going to transition a bunch of the trainings that we do regularly, like maybe we're hoping for a manual material handling session, a supervisor ergonomics session, maybe a frontline staff's training session. We're still trying to figure out how to make that one work. Vehicle ergonomics is likely to be on there, office ergonomics. There'll probably be joint health and safety committee modules, and we're going to try and drop them down into sort of bite-sized chunks, right? So that your joint health and safety committee, our training tends to be long, but they can hop online and do an hour, right? They can do hazard identification, and they can hop online another hour later on in the week or next week and do accident investigation. And so there'll be different snippets put in there, and you can assign, the program is designed so that we would work with you to assign which employees or which staff members need access to which modules. So your committee members obviously get access to different modules than your general employees would. And so we can work with you to customize all of that. But it will be a system. It's coming, I promise. Right? We're starting with this office ergonomics one because that's the big need right now. But the idea is that the system will have all kinds of different modules that you can release to staff, and you pay per user, right? Depending on how many users you have, you'll pay a set rate per user, which we're finalizing as well, and we'll have more information about. So when we look at that, we're going to get, when you hop in there, there'll be good content about all the different components, right? These are some examples of the kind of layouts and setups that we've got going on. There'll be some good content similar to the at-home ergonomics session we've been delivering, but transitioned away from that temporary feel to the more permanent work from home situation, right? So we'll be talking about workstation setup in terms of monitors and chairs and keyboard mice and all the different components. So we'll take you through all the pieces. But more importantly than that, probably from your end, more interested in some of the engagement pieces. How do we engage engage or make it interesting for your staff, right? And so we have built in several different interesting engagement pieces. For example, it'll take you through chair setup. It talks about the different paddles. And then there are often, as you can see here on the left, I can't play it. I just got a screenshot in there, actually. I should have brought in the video itself, maybe. But you could hit play here, and it'll actually walk you through how to make that adjustment. So this is the lever that we're talking about. This is where you find it, typically under the armrest on the right-hand side. This is a quick summary of what it looks like. And here is a video of how to adjust it with us walking you through it. And so most of our, not most, but yeah, I would say most, not all, but most of our sections do have that little video going along so that people can see what that adjustment feature is going to look like and be able to hopefully do that at home as well so they can complete the self-assessment piece, right? So we've got lots of engagement opportunities here for videos. And like I said, the self-assessment piece is built in there. So they'll ask all kinds of questions, will get pulled into that back-end data that you can use for your management of your program, which is exciting. So like I said, still work in progress. We're getting closer and closer every day, but we're very excited to be sharing this with people and starting to talk about it in more detail. And those demo days will be coming. I can't wait to book them, so they'll be up and running here shortly. I have about 5 more minutes today. I'm a little, I'm right on time. It's nice, actually. So wondering if anybody has any questions for me about what's coming in the OLS, about training initiatives or needs that they're been thinking about and they want to sort of pose to the group or pose to me. I'm open to those questions. Crickets out there today? Crickets, crickets? Hey, no problem. If you have to run away to the next meeting, I get it. This is, if you don't have any questions, this is a good opportunity to take your 5 minutes of standing time, right? Get up out of that chair for a couple minutes, do a quick lap around your living room. If it's nice outside, stand outside for 2 minutes. That's always nice, right? If you get a chance. If it's raining like here, then. Ooh, good question. Would you be able to link the OLS to our corporate LMS? At this moment, there won't be a link, which is a great question. We don't, the program will be a standalone online module. However, we will also be allowing access. Well, that's not true, Anne. Maybe you could link. I'm not sure. It'll depend on how your program works and whether you can link to an external website, because that's ultimately what it'll be, is a website hosted with the different modules located on there. But if that doesn't work, then we also are intending, because you told us that a whole variety of ways is how to get the information is key. And so we also intend to provide like a SCORM file that you could upload to your LMS as well and have that option internally, right? So if you wanted to purchase that and put it on your internal LMS, you could do that as well, right? If that's a better option for you. So there are different ways to get access to the content. Good question. I'm going to explore linking it to your corporate LMS, though. That's an interesting option. This is all new chartered territory for us, so we're still learning a lot about LMS programs and how we access it, what types of files, and what that's going to look and feel like, and how we get the data. It's been quite the learning curve over the last couple months. So, I know temporary keeps going. Yeah. Yes, Lisa, I feel you. So temporary situation going on and on. It doesn't feel temporary anymore, doesn't it? Right? As Lisa says, many employers are still consider work from home temporary, so they aren't going down the road of providing equipment or funding for proper workstation setup. And I agree. And it's getting harder and harder to sell towels, cushion boxes, and bins, right? People are feeling like it's not temporary and they're looking for something more permanent. And I think people are buying it themselves too, right? We're still seeing that. There's still a shortage. There's office ergonomic equipment is still hard to come by sometimes. And so it can be a real challenge in order to ultimately, in order to get some of the equipment. But people are in some cases tackling it themselves. They're no longer waiting for a monitor to arrive. They're just buying one, right? And we've seen more and more of that happening too, which is good and bad depending on what comes next in terms of our setup. But yeah, it's absolutely a challenge, right? Temporary doesn't feel very temporary right now, a year plus later. Yeah, okay. So Anne's suggesting that sort of being able to link it to the existing LMS would result in more visibility because it would be part of the existing LMS where staff would already be accessing. So again, more familiarity with your existing program would likely increase compliance and participation in that program, which I get. That makes sense, Anne. Actually, I'm going to explore that a little bit more and I'm going to reach out to our developer to ask some questions about that. be curious to explore it with you a little bit, actually. So I may reach out with some questions. All right. I got 11 and I don't see any new questions rolling in here. I'm going to sit for another minute. I'm going to turn my webcam off, but I'm going to be here. So if you have any questions, shoot them at me. You can also always email us. Go online through proergonomics.ca and our email address will be there. It's an info@proergonomics.ca is what the email is. And that will come directly to my inbox. Actually, I get all those emails. So if you have a question from today you think about later, let me know. I am happy to answer those. Catherine, I see you typing, so I'll give you a second. Thanks, Lisa. Have a great day. Oh, great. You've got something set up with Sarah. That's awesome. I'm glad to hear it, Catherine. That's perfect. Catherine, just a few questions in terms of ergonomic education. What would you recommend for you? Oh, you mean like you getting trained on ergonomics? Is that what you're thinking about? Sort of personal training, professional development? Ah, yes, got you. Okay. Catherine, I think let's have that conversation either with Sarah or you and me can have that. I think let's do that in person. It's easier to do rather than me typing it out and or me talking and you trying to type. So let's do that. So why don't you send me an email, info@proergonomics.ca, and we can set up a time to have a quick chat about that because it'll be a lot easier to do it when we can talk to each other rather than you typing frantically and me responding. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I am going to close out the webinar today because I'm not seeing any new questions. Just Catherine and I need to connect. So I thank you for your time this morning. I hope you found today valuable, and I appreciate you joining us for the 3 parts of our Work From Home webinar series. Have a great afternoon, everyone.